Welcome to CodeCraft, Exploring Blizzard Engineering.
Hello, BlizzCon 2019. How are you all doing? Welcome to CodeCraft. I am up here with some incredible engineers from across the company, and here is how this panel is going to work. We're going to start with a few questions that we've prepared so that you have a chance to get to know all of us. You can also see some awesome images of some of my panelists up here behind me as they were experiencing Blizzard over the years to give you a little more flavor for what Blizzard life is like. And then after we go through those couple of questions, we're really going to turn it over to all of you. So as you're listening to what we have to share, think about what you'd like to know about engineering at Blizzard, and prepare yourself to ask those questions, and we will get ready to answer them for you. We're going to start with introductions. My name is Rochelle Davis. I am a lead features engineer on a new project, and I've been at Blizzard for about 8.5 years.
Hi, my name is Matt Yan. I'm a software engineer for World of Warcraft, and I've been in WoW for 2 years.
Hey everyone, my name's John Hewerman. I'm the lead tools engineer on Diablo 4. And I have been at Blizzard for 10 years.
Hi, I'm Jesse Blomberg. I'm the lead server engineer for Overwatch. I've been at Blizzard for 17.5 years.
Hi, I'm Nathan Brown. I'm a senior software engineer for Battle.net and online products, and I've been with Blizzard for 12 years.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Rosenberg. I am an associate software engineer on Battle.net and online products, and I've been at Blizzard for 6 months.
Yes! And now that you know everyone's names, let's get started with a question I like to ask of everyone up on the panel. How, Anna, let's start with you, did you get to Blizzard?
So, like many of you here, I'm sure, I grew up playing video games, and I grew up playing Blizzard video games. And when I was getting ready to graduate high school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was actually sitting in my high school counselor's office, and I saw a book about video game development. And I thought, wow, maybe I can make this a career. So I actually went to school for game design and development. And during my time there, I actually landed an internship at Blizzard. So I was in the Austin office doing software engineering for Blizzard.com and BlizzCon.com, and I ended up coming back full-time 6 months ago.
Welcome back. We're glad to have you. Nathan, what about you? How did you get to Blizzard?
So I actually started in customer service and was there for a number of years, eventually transitioned over to the quality assurance department, get a better feel of how software development within Blizzard works. Later, I transitioned over to our web dev portal team, and we've been making tools since then that everybody uses.
So you've had the fortune of being on many teams at Blizzard.
Yes.
Lots of breadth with Nathan's story. OK, Jesse, 17.5 years ago, how did you get to Blizzard?
So I went to college for computer engineering, and I didn't get a job at Blizzard right out of college. The only job offer I got was a little business consulting firm doing insurance software in Connecticut, like thousands of miles from anybody I knew. That started in May. September of 2001, 9/11 happened, and the insurance industry basically shut down, and they laid off my entire company. So fresh out of college, no job. I'm like, I'm either going to get a job at a grocery store, or I'm going to apply everywhere I can. I had a friend who had already applied and got a job at Blizzard, and he put a good word in for me, and I got an interview, and I was able to join the WoW team as an associate tools engineer, and I've been here ever since.
So you started in tools, and now you're somewhere else.
Yeah.
Awesome. OK. John, how did you get to Blizzard?
I started working at Blizzard because I got lost in Irvine trying to find the 405 freeway. Like, true story, I was at the Irvine Spectrum, which is this big mall down South Irvine, and just got lost one night. And as I was trying to find the on-ramp for the freeway, I came to a stop sign. I looked up. There was the big pearly gates of Blizzard. And I said, oh, wow, I didn't know they were in Irvine. So, yeah, I applied that weekend, and the rest is history. It's 10 years later.
So you're telling me that my inability to map find and my lack of spatial awareness is actually a really big benefit?
It could lead to your next big career move.
Wow. Excellent. Good to know. Matt, how did you get to Blizzard?
Yeah, so I've always loved games. I would watch my dad play World of Warcraft when I was a kid, and I always wanted to play, but he never let me because I was like 8 or something. And much to my mom's chagrin, for like my 11th or 12th birthday, he got me a WoW sub, and I was just hooked. After that, it was just done. So when I got to high school and just trying to figure out what do I want to do with the rest of my life, I'd done a little bit of programming, And I really liked it, so I decided I would try to make a career out of it, and there was no other place I wanted to work other than Blizzard. So yeah, I went through college, junior year. I lucked out. I managed to land an internship with the World of Warcraft team, actually same team that I'm on right now. And I didn't burn the place down. And right before I ended, they gave me a return offer to come back, and here I am.
Excellent. And I guess I'll throw my name in on this one too. So I did not know what I wanted to do when I was growing up. I was doing a lot of musical theater as a child, and when I got to high school, that's what I thought I was going to be, was a performer. And that changed for me in college, and I decided I didn't want to entertain on stage, but I wanted to find some other way of entertaining. And I fell in love with engineering when I took my first coding class at 19 years old. And I ended up finding Blizzard through a class I took where I had to play WoW and level my character for homework. It's a good class. I eventually made it my mission to have an internship here, and that's eventually what happened to me. So like Anna and Matt, I was an intern at Blizzard 8.5 years ago, and I've never left. I've gotten to move around at a couple of different teams, and I'm still here now as a lead features engineer. Okay, so I have a question for each of the panelists. Again, to get a little bit more information to all of you, so while you're thinking of your questions, here's some more context. We'll start with Matt. What is it like working on a giant game like WoW?
So it boils down to two things. Super cool, super scary. You know, you're working on a game that touches millions upon millions of people, so when you do something cool, you know, you affected millions and millions of people. When you do something bad, you affect millions and millions of people. And right before I started at Blizzard, I kind of had this image on how I was going to be as an engineer. This like cool as a cucumber, super suave engineer that just like kicked butt and committed tons of really good code. And the unfortunate reality is that I was super duper nervous. My very first day, I remember my leads introducing me to these engineers, you know, like Jesse. They have like 15 years of experience. I've been coding for like 4. You know, I'm just going to get a coffee, and I'm meeting people. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Jeff from the Overwatch team. And you know, I asked myself a question that I think a lot of engineers ask themselves, which is, you know, how am I supposed to keep up? At the time, we were about to launch Legion. Everything was moving super quickly, and I'm really fortunate that Blizzard has really good answers to that question. I have, you know, my lead and my manager, and I'm always free to, you know, I have one-on-ones with them. I'm always free to talk to them, ask questions, even hard questions about the game, you know, things that I disagree with, questions about Blizzard as a whole. Expanding to engineering, all those really scary engineers that have, you know, almost as much experience as I've been alive. They love answering questions. You know, there's no such thing as a stupid question, and altogether, it just makes Blizzard a really cool place to work.
Everyone is super welcoming, and it's okay to not know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like asking questions is kind of the bread and butter of what we do, and sometimes the best questions come from somebody new. Thanks for sharing. John, for you, you might encounter engineers who aren't in games. And from outside the games industry, like, how hard is it to break into the games industry? And do you have to learn a bunch of 3D math to do it?
I actually joined Blizzard from outside of the games industry. I'm proof that it can happen. I was working at a small company across the street called Disney, I think. Am I saying that right? Yeah, so I think that there is maybe a misconception that in order to get a job in the games industry, you're like gameplay engineers and graphics programmers are like the only two like I ever really knew of. But it turns out there's a lot of programming that it takes to get these games made. So I ended up joining the tools team on Diablo 3. We are the team that's responsible for making the level editor, the world builder, crafting all the quests, writing all the dialogue when you talk to the NPCs, all that good stuff. Super fun. Not a lick of linear algebra to be found, which is great. Right? So, I think the important thing, regardless of what your specialization is, whether it's graphics or gameplay or whatever, the important thing is that you just have a solid engineering background, right? Like, do you know why you can write a line of code one way It runs twice as fast as if you write it the other way. When you compile something, what's really going on behind the scenes? Like, that's the important stuff to me. I know when I'm looking to hire new engineers, I'm not looking to see if you graduated from some Ivy League college or some, crazy games-specific program. If you have a standard computer science degree and you really understand what's going on behind the scenes, that's good enough to get you in the industry, for sure.
And like John said, there are so many different roles that don't touch 3D math, and some that do, but they are definitely many and varied. There's lots of different kinds of engineering required to make the games and experiences that we make.
If you're a audio engineer, go to jobs.blizzard.com. Audio engineers are really hard to find, right? So if you like music and you're an engineer, there's your new career path.
Audio engineers are basically unicorns at this
They
point, as far as I'm
basically are.
concerned.
Yeah.
We don't have any audio engineers up here. We have
There's a
an
reason
engine
for that.
programmer here. We have a tools programmer here. Jesse, you are a server programmer. What does a server programmer do?
I don't want to speak for every team at Blizzard. I know what Overwatch server engineers do. It varies across the company, but for my team, there's kind of two ways I'd answer that question. There's what do we do and sort of how we do it. And what we do covers a wide variety of things. The first thing we do is we are responsible for integrating our server stack into the rest of the Blizzard platform, which is Battle.net. So everything these two do, my team has to integrate with. So we integrate with login and authentication. Obviously, like one of the most important things is making sure that only you get into your account. Chat, all the social systems that Battle.net offers, Battle Pay, where you can actually, buy something. We integrate with all that. So integrate into the Blizzard platform and integrate into the console platforms as well. We actually do all the integration with Sony and Microsoft and now Nintendo. After we do that, we have to do all the back end for our team for features. So my team's actually responsible for matchmaking, parties, persistence. So we save your character, try not to lose anything, those kind of things. And then the last thing we kind of do that's for the rest of our team, which is we build the platform. If Battle.net is the platform for all Battle.net games, we're the platform for Overwatch. So we have to build the platform that everybody else can rely on. And that means we're building infrastructure like how are we going to spin up servers? How are servers going to find each other so that servers can talk? How are we going to get data between those servers? So we write networking protocols. We're responsible for the network protocol that is from servers to game clients actually in Overwatch as well. I think more important than what we do, it's like how we do it. And this is where I use an analogy that my team is not necessarily a fan of, but I really like it. If you imagine that a game is a cake, and we all love cake, it's delicious, it's got layers, just like an ogre. My team makes the cake stand. Cake stands are not known to be super exciting. But there's certain things you need out of a cake stand. You want your cake to be delicious and beautiful. Your cake stand, it's nice for it to be pretty, but no one says it must be pretty, and that's the only thing a cake stand needs to do. The most important thing for a cake stand is that it holds up a cake. And that's really the prime responsibility, right? You don't want a fancy cake stand that tips over your cake. So if you think about that from a values perspective, what we have to make is the super reliable cake stand that everybody else can put the beautiful cake on, and you're never worried about it tipping over. And that's our hundreds of thousands of players who are playing our game. You can trust that the servers will be up. It's for our internal team to know that when they deploy a server and they make a change, it's going to work on their desktop. And that's really it. It's like, how do we be reliable? How do we be trustworthy for our players and for our team?
I love this analogy. I think in some ways we all are building some form of cake stand. I certainly am building a cake stand all the time. And I think it's important to hold up the cake. The cake stand can be beautiful, though. I mean, I think the cake stand can be beautiful. But what matters is, are we supporting the rest of the platform and the people that are using it and making sure that everything doesn't fall over? So, agreed.
Let's hear it for cake stands. Thank you, Jesse.
OK, Nathan, you mentioned that you work in Battle.net and online products, which is actually a very large organization with a wide breadth of responsibilities. What exactly do you do on Battle.net and online products, and how does that fit into the larger Blizzard picture?
Well, in the larger Blizzard picture, Battle.net and online products, following the analogy, is really the table. We have many cake stands on top of us. In my
How
team,
far down does this go? Is somebody the floor?
I imagine somebody's the floor here somewhere. Maybe our database administrators somewhere around there. But so for my team is the dev portal team, and we're responsible for making tooling. We have an account, a test account system tool. We call it Murky, and everybody here has used it. We use it to adjust our accounts, set them in previous known states so that we can actually test certain functionality of we need an account that can log in with Overwatch and have these licenses associated to it. We're responsible for a good portion of that. And that's one of the tools that the DevWorld team manages. We also manage develop.battle.net, our external APIs, documentation around that. So that's kind of the breadth. There's also internal facing tools that we can't really go into, but we have lots of partners, lots of clients that we have to worry about, not just Blizzard, but like Treyarch and Beanox and other people that need to integrate with Battle.net, and we have to make sure that all their needs are met with our tools.
So the code that you write on Battle.net and online products is used by a lot of people, you're saying, internal and external.
Yes, definitely.
Incredible amounts of traffic. Thanks for sharing. Well, before I ask Anna her question, I'm going to invite you all to line up at the mic stands, which are in this aisle and this aisle. If you're here in the audience, please line up at this time. We'll get Anna to answer her questions, and then we'll go to the audience to you for Q&A. Anna, what is expected from an associate software engineer at Blizzard?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Rochelle. Kind of going off of what Matt was saying earlier, I think that the primary responsibility for an associate is to learn and grow. And I think that that really resonates. It's one of our core values, and it resonates in our engineering culture and has enabled me, or more empowered me, to take on responsibilities that I don't think I would have otherwise. I just don't have the experience as someone who has been in the industry for 12, 17 years. So being able to learn from them and collaborate with these senior engineers is awesome for me to become a better engineer. One way that I have taken on greater responsibilities through this is authentication in our app being the new content experience inside of the new Battle.net beta. Definitely check it out, it's awesome. And I had never worked with authentication to this scale before, or to also using Blizzard's backend systems like what you do. And I'm thankful that I have a supportive team who helps me to grow and learn these things and help me ask the right questions to the right people to set up the authentication flow that is in our current app. And it was definitely challenging for me, but I think that that challenge really helped me to learn a lot in the process and grow into a better engineer.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Anna. It is now time to go to the audience. So we are going to start with this side over here.
Are you guys using containerization, Kubernetes, things like that on the back end or platform level?
I'm probably the best suited for that one. So it actually varies across the teams. Containerization is rather new, right? And we have a lot of older games that launched before there was the idea of even a cloud. So before containerization, VMs. So our team actually, like, containerization wasn't mature enough when Overwatch launched to say that's a trustworthy thing. Let's trust the entire infrastructure to it. We do launch on VMs, so everything's running in a hypervisor. That way we can quickly redeploy stuff. There are teams that are working on new projects within Blizzard that do run within Kubernetes. And I think it's a really exciting technology that can actually make things a lot faster for us for when it comes to deploying fixes. Just makes you much more agile in general and solves a lot of problems for us. So I'm actually pretty excited about containers.
Thank you.
To add on to that, in our platform, we are in that transitional state where we have older legacy systems that don't necessarily work with containerization. We're in the process of migrating this over. We have other services that are containerized. So it's definitely a mix.
As it becomes possible to adopt new technologies, we definitely try to when the right time and when it's safe to do so. All right, we're going to go over here to a question.
So for anyone interested in eventually becoming a part of an engineering team in Blizzard, any gaming industry, what programming languages do you recommend that people focus on to join these teams?
I think it varies across the organization. Do we want to like run down the line and share what we're coding in?
Yeah.
I'll start. I'm in C#.
Yeah. I use like C++ and HLSL, which is a shader language.
Yeah, on tools for Diablo 4, the tool itself is written in C#, WPF. The game is C++, obviously, and we have an interop layer that glues the two together.
Yeah, Overwatch is a similar story. The entire game is in C++. Our tool chain is all in TED, which is called TED, the tank editor. It's a long story. TED is written in C#. And we actually use a smattering of other languages for administration purposes. So there's actually a lot of Python going on within our infrastructure as well.
For us, we are primarily Java-based with Spring Framework on top of it. For our tooling, we have front-end technology. So we've looked into Angular. We've looked into Vue. But they're kind of like you said, there's a smattering of other technologies behind the scenes. We've seen some Go stuff, some Python stuff. Other things along those lines.
I primarily work in JavaScript.
Thank you all. And I would also add to that, so these are just some of the languages across Blizzard. There are other departments not represented up here that are certainly using other languages. And for me, it really harkens back to what John, I think, mentioned earlier, where it's not really, it's how you use the knowledge you have about the language. I think of programming language as kind of like romance languages. If you know how to speak a little bit of French, you probably can pick up Spanish because a lot of it kind of relates. So I wouldn't hyper-focus on the syntax of the language if you're thinking about what do I learn, especially if you know a language already, but try to figure out the concepts and really understand them, see what it is that is happening under the hood, and then apply that to whatever language that you have to learn. Story on this, when I interned at Blizzard, I didn't know C#. I got the job, and then they said, hey, by the way, you're going to be coding in C#. I ended up working on Hearthstone, and I wasn't a C# master, but I learned a little bit of it, and I learned the rest on the job. So that's definitely possible to do as well. All right, we're going to go over here. Oh,
I would also
sorry,
say
one
that
second.
I really think you should know like what kind of job you want in the games industry. I don't think there's a lot of engine programmers like Matt who are going to be doing their work in Python in the next few years, to be honest.
Might be a little tough.
There's a lot of opportunities throughout Blizzard for other languages, but if you have a very high-performance environment, it's probably going to be C++. A lot of the tools teams are using C#. It's becoming really common. So it's kind of where you want to go, kind of dictates a little bit of that as well.
That's a great call out. Thanks. OK, now over here.
Yeah, so this is targeted at the cake stand developers mostly. So if the popularity of esports kind of took off, has that influenced your architectural decisions for like the platform as far as performance or like reliability goes, since there's competition and money on the line?
It's definitely been something I've reinforced with the team. But if you think about it, we need to be reliable regardless of whether it's an esport. There's a live broadcast. It's terrible if the game crashes. If the game crashes and 100,000 people can't play, that's just as bad. Like, we make a game for players, not for an esport. Like, the priority is to make a game that everybody can play all the time. Those overlap. It's like if you need a game that never crashes, it works for both. So reliability becomes sort of just like, it's a feature in and of itself. Like, cool heroes are a feature, 60 frames per second is a feature, so is reliability.
And to add on to that, the under the cake stand answer, we definitely have those same concerns about performance, and we don't always necessarily address it within the programming language itself. There's other system architecture solutions that we can choose, like putting up multiple nodes of something, throwing load balancers, and all kinds of interesting tech that you do to make sure that you keep that uptime.
Thanks.
Great. Over here.
I do a lot of work in infrastructure automation, and I look at the jobs available and their requirements and their pluses. It's like I have half of the job requirements, half of the pluses. And it feels like I'm very square peg and round hole sort of situation. Should I like apply to all those sorts of jobs, or try to focus on just like one of them or two of them? And it's like I have like 5 jobs you guys have posted.
My advice on this would be apply to anything that you are interested in. If it speaks to you in any way, apply to it. But also tailor your application to each one. So take the time to actually say, oh, this job or this team is looking for these things, and I know these things about this team. Maybe it's WoW, and then maybe there's another one that's Overwatch, and maybe another one that's Battle.net. Actually take the time to tailor both your resume and your cover letter to apply.
Thank you.
I'll +1 the whole cover letter thing. As someone who does hiring, I love the cover letter. It is your opportunity to kind of give me a glimpse into who you are, right? Because the resume, it's usually a bunch of bullet points, it's a bunch of keywords that we kind of scan through. I take the time to read each and every cover letter because like that's who you are and that's what you're interested, you know? So yeah, don't forget the cover letter.
Yeah, cover letter's critical. That's how I get a sense. I care if someone says they love Overwatch in a cover letter. If they talk about how much they want to work at Blizzard and their favorite games are StarCraft and WoW, I worry if they're a good fit for my team if they didn't mention that they also like Overwatch and that they play. We want people on our team to be passionate about the game they're working on, not, oh, I just want to in at Blizzard, because that's kind of how it looks if someone's like, my dream in my life is to work on StarCraft. I'm applying to the Overwatch team. It's like, why are you here?
I want to call out too, like that's going to vary by team. So if you're applying for a game team, like hopefully you are at least excited to learn to play that game. But if you're applying for a more technical team that's more platform-based, that may not be necessary. And we certainly need a lot of extremely qualified and talented technicians to build our code across the company. So you don't have to be the most into-it gamer in the world either to work at Blizzard.
To add on to the cover letter thing, it also gives you an opportunity to expand and fill in the holes that your resume has. Call out things that you think are especially relevant that aren't necessarily shown maybe in your job history, that might just fit a one-line thing on your resume. But if you're in cover letter, like this is super relevant to this position and here's why, that's a really big thing for us too.
So summary, cover letters matter. Thanks.
Yeah.
Over here.
I wanted to ask, with the latest GDPR changes for data privacy, what with Warden screen scraping and all that, how have you guys had to retool that?
There was so much work that went into adhering to GDPR. Like a lot of hours from a lot of people across the entirety of the company. It's hard to even begin. Does anybody want to talk about their experience with it?
Yeah, so there's nobody up here from the game security engineering team. They're actually responsible for architecting and implementing Warden, which they do a great job making sure that cheaters don't ruin Overwatch. I appreciate their work. Like, what did we have to do? We're always very careful with how we use Warden so that we're not sending private player data up and that we're well within the confines of anything. For my team, we spent, I think I had a single engineer work 4 months just to be GDPR compliant on all the right of erasure and right of access requests. So every team took it super serious about how we went about doing that.
Absolutely.
Just a step beyond that, our APIs expose a lot of data, and we're in this somewhat transitional state of the APIs that are publicly available for not just GDPR, but CCNA and other privacy initiatives that are going forward. It's something we care very seriously about, and we want to make sure everyone has their right to their own privacy.
Mm-hmm. Over here.
Hi. In my experience, I've seen that internships are really pointed toward people straight out of school. Are there opportunities for people that have already out of school to have an internship?
So at Blizzard, the internships are open to anybody returning to school. However, that doesn't mean you need to be, in college at the, 18 to 22 age range. It's any schooling at any age, any level. So as long as you're returning to school in the fall, usually after the internship is over, the internships take place in the summer, you are eligible to apply. Over here.
Hi. My question is related to, it seems that dev teams kind of have a lot of their own ability to operate under their own auspices. So is there ubiquitous coding standards for Blizzard engineers in general, or is that something that teams come up with as they form? And kind of as a follow-up to that, like how much latitude do you have with choosing libraries and frameworks that you go to use, or is there like a huge bureaucratic process involved?
This borders on the tabs versus spaces question.
He's trying to
5 spaces, right?
He's trying to start a holy war right now.
I think so.
If you would all individually answer Vim or Emacs, thank you.
Who wants to take this one first?
So, yeah,
Meet the bus.
Spaces is essentially what the company is standardized on. Blizzard operates very much like a bunch of little studios under one big umbrella, right? So we are all very autonomous. We kind of make our own decisions for our own games. We do a lot of cross-pollination. We talk to one another. We have what's called an engineering council, where the tech directors from each of the teams get together in a private room. I don't know. Engineering council sounds so mysterious to me, but
wear cloaks.
Wear clothes. Yeah.
Smoke cigars. I don't know.
There's candles involved. Anyway, but they get together and they discuss matters that kind of pertain across the whole company. But by and large, it's definitely left up to the individual teams.
Yeah.
And I know that the coding standards, for example, they're similar from one team to the next, and we do share some code here and there. But it's pretty much the when in Rome approach, right? If you are working in a particular file and it doesn't follow the standard, you just kind of follow whatever standard it established, right? So at least it kind of looks the same.
Yeah, and that's a practicality measure, right? If you go into some old code that doesn't meet your current coding standard, you need to make a bug fix. If you make the bug fix and reformat the entire file to follow your coding standard and you commit it, the diff for your fix looks like you just changed the whole file, and now the next person to look for your fix can't figure out what you actually changed. And they're like, oh, I turn off white space? No, he rearranged everything. There's literally no way. So you make your fix in that standard. Maybe you go back later and fix the code style if you need to, but you got to be careful with that sort of thing.
And also, as we mentioned before, we're all in different languages, or at least a variety of them. So it's hard to have one standard across all of the groups when you're in different languages. So it's more of a when in Rome on your team, what does your team do? And then there are some lessons that we learn that's centralized throughout Blizzard with a group that's kind of looking at how do we share that knowledge, how do we teach best practices, and then maybe teams might pick them up, but that's up to the teams to decide. Yeah.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi. So all of you mentioned going to school for software engineering. I was wondering if there's any alternative paths up the mountain, if there's any way to give you some sort of engineering portfolio or something like that for people who can't go to school, not for lack of knowledge or anything or skill, but from funds perhaps.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing special about CS school. What's I think really cool about programming as a whole is anyone can do it. You just need a computer. We've got the internet nowadays that has tons of really good resources on it. If you want to make a game, you could start, anytime you want. I wouldn't start trying to make World of Warcraft maybe, but start with something small. Say tic-tac-toe. You'll learn a lot of lessons on the way. And at least for me personally, like a lot of what I've learned comes through personal experience of I want to make my own little game. Oh shoot, okay, if I want to do this, then I have to do that. And if I want to do that, I'm going to have to do this. And you naturally will learn a lot as you go on. And you don't have to go to school.
Kind of going off of what Matt said as well. School is not a necessity. I think, as we've said before, as long as you have a passion and that you show that you're willing to learn the skills and move forward with them, that's huge. That's so important. It's a big part of what we do is being able to learn and move forward. Yeah.
I think whether or not you have a degree, one thing that you can do is showcase the work you've done. So include a link to your GitHub repository on your resume, or to a YouTube video of a game you built, or something like that, where you can articulate what it is that you contributed to that, either by showing your code or by explaining it in your cover letter, but some way of showing the work you've done, and that speaks for itself, right?
Yeah, my first boss at Blizzard didn't graduate from college, and he was leading World of Warcraft. It's not a requirement. It's just a good sign that you were able to do something for 4 years without quitting, which is nice for an employee to know, he can get through something. Like, if somebody's been working for 3 or 4 years somewhere else, I'm not even looking at what college they went to. I'm looking that they were able to do quality work somewhere else for 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi, I work as a cloud consultant at a cloud consultancy firm, and I'm wondering what some of your approaches are to dynamically scaling your user environments to be able to meet consumer need.
I'm sorry, I only caught most of that question. Can you repeat it slower?
Sorry. What are some of your strategies for dynamically scaling your environments to be able to meet consumer needs as your player base's playtime and engagement goes up and down throughout the year?
Scaling.
Yeah, scaling. I don't personally have much experience with how we handle that on Battle.net, so I can't really speak to it. I have worked at other companies where we made that a very, very big priority to do that automatically, but I don't have experience how we're doing that now at Blizzard. I'm sorry.
So it's the two-edged sword of we have a bunch of individual studios here, and again, back to the containerization thing, we have a lot of games that are old. They existed before the idea of you could spin something up on the cloud or even a VM. Some games just have to provision enough servers to handle the peak load, and then they're stuck burning server resources when they're off peak. Or they scramble IT to reprovision servers, like, hey, let's take all these servers, reassign them, recable them in to get them going for the other game. Overwatch was one of the first games that launched on our private cloud, and so we use VMs, we spin them up on demand. That started off as a manual process. We now auto-scale our instance servers where the game simulation takes place based on player demand, and it's super helpful. It takes a ton of toil out of managing the server base.
Where it's possible, we've tried to do auto-scaling or build it into games that didn't have it, because it's certainly more comfortable than someone having to sit there and like gate in or manually spin up new machines.
Yeah, I don't love calling the reliability team at 2 in the night to say I need servers in China. It's not a good feeling.
Over here.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is, what does it take in an engineering process to remaster old legacy games such as StarCraft?
What was the question?
What does it take in an engineering process to ambassador old legacy games?
Old legacy games, right.
I wish we had somebody from Classic Games up here to answer that question.
You know, I went to a talk. I'm going to now try to tell a story that someone else told very well, so forgive me, this is not my story. But at this talk, they were talking about the birth of Classic, and that is an old legacy game, and it was somebody's project on a hackathon. They went into their own little zone and were like, I wonder if I can load the game. Just load the code. And then that kind of blossomed into, wow, I could load the code. Brilliant engineer spent some time doing this, and then got another friend to join the bandwagon. And then what if I could get that old code to run on the current system? Well, that was another project. And that was what kind of birthed WoW Classic. So it takes somebody being passionate about it, somebody who's excited about it, and then somebody runs with that idea and says, hey, look, and then people also get razzed about the idea. Over here.
Blizzard products have a lot of concurrent users, and in regards to new enhancements and feature rollouts, I was wondering what some of the things you guys look to do in order to mitigate the issues that come with large-scale releases like that.
Well, I don't know if you've all seen Master Control in the front. It's pretty rad. You should check that out. But we have like a mini version of that called the GNOC. And that is, we've got people on that 24/7 watching concurrency, watching issues, kind of being our first triage for live things that come in. There are others who want to jump in on the GNOC or on concurrency?
Well, like when we're trying to roll out a new feature, so Overwatch added roll queue. And we've done that internally with, the team. So you've got 100 people who've tried out roll queue, but how do you know it's going to work for, 100,000 people? Well, so we have an automation team. They're part of our reliability group, and they basically write little robots. And Travis Thornton is somewhere here working, but he's the senior reliability engineer on the team. He's written what we call headless client, which is he can simulate hundreds of thousands of Overwatch players using all of the features in the game. And so he spins up in the cloud a stress test and exercises those features as we're building them, so that we have some assurance that from a load perspective it can handle it, and whatever kind of faults he finds, he reports them back, and we take those super seriously. I know that if he crashed something, then a player can crash it. So that's one of our main approaches that we actually use.
We have Thunder Thursday.
Yeah.
That we test, like across the company, we test internally concurrency and try to stress the systems to do that.
Yeah, I know we were spending a lot of effort to make sure that the platform was super stable for all of the announcements that we had, because we were expecting a spike in traffic, obviously. I mean, we've got a lot of things going on this weekend. So we just took some extra time, made sure our automation tests worked, threw some extra load testing on it ahead of an expected event or
something that's outside of our normal traffic bounds.
Okay, thank you.
Over here.
I've seen that Blizzard has dedicated site reliability engineering positions. Is there anything you can tell us about SRE on your team or at Blizzard other than load testing?
SREs are some of my favorite people. I can tell you that for
absolutely.
sure. I'm really glad we have them embedded on my team.
So we worked really closely with SREs to make sure that our service deploys actually work in our private cloud environment, and as we're evaluating different solutions, because that is their expertise of kind of knowing how things should deploy, what that looks like securely, kind of picking their brains at that. We use them a lot in live operations, just making sure, like, why did this particular instance fall over, and just following up with them, just having a very close relationship with them to kind of bring them on as a partner to our success.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi. For somebody who's not in school anymore and doesn't have a network of programmer friends, what suggestions do you have for getting feedback, constructive feedback on your work that you do in your own personal time?
I think one thing you can try is working on open source software. A lot of the time you'll have pull requests when they want to commit to the main branch. Hopefully whatever open source software you're contributing to doesn't just fire stuff into trunk willy-nilly. But that can you'll get a lot of good feedback from stuff. Stack Overflow isn't really the spot for code feedback as much as questions. But I would say open source stuff is probably your best bet.
And then along those lines, like, because I'm working and teaching myself, would you recommend working on one part? So if I'm doing gameplay, just focus on gameplay. Don't do UI and the whole gamut of networking along with it, because it's so much time.
I wouldn't try to dive, super deep into everything. Obviously, it can be better to have more of a focus of what you want to work on. But definitely giving things a try is important. I didn't always know that I wanted to be a graphics engineer. I actually thought I wanted to do gameplay for the longest time, and then I tried to be a gameplay engineer for a game and realized I did not want to be a gameplay engineer.
I had this experience with graphics, so I totally understand.
I love graphics. So yeah, definitely give it a try, but I would try to stick within the domain of what you really want to get experience in.
Another thing you could do along those lines, everything that Matt said is really good advice, but getting a group of people together, if you know anybody that doesn't make, the code side of things, but you might be able to get an artist friend, and maybe you want to work with a designer, and you can get a lot of good feedback about how you work across disciplines, because that's a huge part of what we all do. We're not only working with engineers. So some of that feedback comes from how do I communicate, and how do I make sure I'm understanding what you're saying and translating your design request into a coding task. So some of the feedback that comes into play when you're trying to work in this industry, the most important feedback can be non-technical.
Thank you so much.
And as far as the, do I need to do graphics and UI and this and sound and everything else, I would actually encourage you to just kind of focus, pick where you want to go with your career and just kind of focus on that. One of the gameplay engineers on Diablo was telling me a story. He got a great piece of advice when he was doing an internship at one of the other studios. I don't recall what it was. But the advice was basically just be curious and notice details. As you're playing a video game, notice the little details. And if you see something that's cool or something that you don't really know how it's done, go figure it out and write a little program, the important thing is to just, that'll keep you focused. You'll end up with lots of little programs that do very small things, but you're going to learn a little bit about IK, you're going to learn a little bit about, vector math, and eventually you'll just end up building up all these skills.
Failing that, become an audio engineer.
Or become an audio engineer.
Over here.
Hi, yes. So I'm a bit of an odd duck here. I'm a hardware engineer sitting in a sea of CS and software engineers. Just a mere curiosity more than anything else. I'm kind of wondering, how are hardware engineers utilized at Blizzard? If not, which would make sense based on the company that it is, how are tasks that a hardware engineer would do, servers, hardware game specs, that kind of thing, how's that performed at Blizzard, that kind of thing?
I can speak a little bit about as far as the hardware specs that we work on. We have got a lot of partners with different vendors. We do a lot of testing. I wish I had a picture. Across like the back wall of the engine pit for WoW is probably like 60 or 70 graphics cards. And we have this sort of like test bench computer that's like sitting on top of the case, and you can just rip stuff out of it. So we will, test a lot of hardware. Obviously, I can't test every permute of like CPU, GPU. Yeah, we have teams at Blizzard that will test them in spec when we're doing raid testing to figure out the performance of, how does this raid run at low, medium, high settings. We'll go through with all sorts of different hardware profiles to try to figure out, what exactly, what type of computer needs help, what we need to fix, and stuff like that. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi, so I have kind of a double question for the C++ engineers. First one, is Blizzard going to follow kind of EA's footsteps in open sourcing like the BLZ standard template library? And then the second question I have is, throughout the different studios at Blizzard, have you settled kind of on a version of C++ for each studio, like C++ 17 or 14?
As far as settling on a C++ standard, no. It's a very dangerous game to just upgrade your standard. You need to choose that moment very carefully. I wouldn't try to do that right before release, because you can take a lot of your engineers offline trying to solve different build issues and differences. I know recently, in the past year or two, I think, WoW upgraded to C++ 17, which has been nice to get a bunch of the stuff from that. Yeah.
Yeah, the C++ standard is kind of a living, breathing thing, right? It's always moving forward. But if you have a game with millions of lines of code, you can't say, okay, everywhere where the new standard has a new feature, we're going to replace the old code. It's like, what's the value there? If the code's working, why am I tearing it out? For Overwatch in particular, we ship now on 4 different platforms, and we're actually constrained by what each platform allows. I might not have compiler parity on a Switch and a PS4 and an Xbox, and all my server code has to build somewhere too, and that's going to run on a Linux environment. So we can't be super aggressive about just taking on new features until we know that they're ready and that they actually gain us some value, because there's some costs involved in switching over. And because I'm going to use lambdas now. Everywhere we had something, let's switch that to a lambda. Let's not rewrite code just for the sake of rewriting code.
Mm-hmm. Somewhat tangentially, Java has somewhat of a fractured state as well. Like we're in my team, we maintain multiple different projects, and each of those projects, you can kind of see when it last got a major overhaul, because you can tell what version of Java it was compiled against and what you should be using. It has pluses and minuses with it, and it's just something to be conscious of. And we actually make the decision on a project-by-project basis, and what features do we actually need versus compatibility and ease of transitioning between them. That said, there's still a lot of common ground between them that it's very easy to transition over.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hey there. My question is related to timescales and scope of work. So whether it's something small, like a new feature for one class in one of the games, or something big like a new expansion, we got the expansion for World of Warcraft. How far in advance do you guys find out about this? How long does it take you to work on it? And do you know what it will actually be used for in the game when you get those requirements?
I think this is also going to vary by team to team and game to game, like as you mentioned, by feature to feature. We certainly are very involved, though. As engineers, my experience has not been a very waterfall, okay, well, designers made a choice in a room somewhere, let me come out and hand it to you and tell you what you need to build. It's very much a collaboration. So in the work that I've done on all of the teams, actually, that I've been on at Blizzard, I've been involved since the beginning. And part of that is the philosophy that I came from the Hearthstone team where everyone is a designer. And I've kind of owned that with all of the teams I have been on. So it's great, actually, because I get to contribute to the game design, and then I can also think about it from a technical perspective. How is what I need to build going to affect the feature itself, and how can I make the feature better because I know the technical requirements in a way that maybe a designer might not? So to answer the timescale one, again, it's going to be very specific, but part of being involved early means that we can move things around and know quite a bit of a roadmap for a lot of what we want to build, as much as the designers might know, or the people on the team, or leadership in any capacity might know what we want to build, and then pivot when we realize we want to build something else. Because that happens too, right? We discover, oh, this isn't fun. We want to make it more fun. Or this isn't doing what we wanted to do, solving what we wanted to solve. So it might shift, but we do try to roadmap fairly early.
So in that context, for something as big as an expansion, how early do you start working on something like that?
So that's going to vary per game. I think the team that actually does the biggest expansions would be WoW, and so Matt's going to be able to answer that one. It's going to be a very different answer for Overwatch.
Yeah, it's a hard question because it's not a hard line in the sand. It's not that all of a sudden the entirety of WoW has gone from working, from BFA to Shadowlands. We're still working on BFA. We're working on our 8.3 patch that's coming out, and at the same time, we are also working on Shadowlands. Because a lot of the team doesn't all need to be there at once. Concept art, by the time we're at 8.3, has most things figured out, but for Shadowlands, we have this huge canvas of what do we want things to look like, Bastion, Revendreth, all those. Yeah, it depends a lot, and like we all said, per team, this can vary dramatically.
I think requirements, at least on the Diablo 4 team, well, on tools specifically, right? Because our customers are the artists and the engineers and the designers.
That's really what I'm interested in, actually.
Yeah, those requests come in. Some of them are really good, very detailed. You can just get right to work. Most of them are not, and so that kind of forces us to. We got to get up and we got to go and walk over to them. And have a conversation, and maybe we start working together and we whiteboard something, and then I'll go, whip it up real quick and call them over to my desk, like, what do you think about this? Like, it's very interactive like that. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Over here.
Hi. Obviously, when you're developing, you want to be testing your software and obviously automating that testing as much as possible, but I think with games, sometimes getting players actually in the game and experiencing all the different configurations and things can be as pretty useful. So when you're developing like a demo or a PTR or something like that for a large patch of content, and you only sort of give them one part of it, or it's time gated, how do you deal with sort of the uncertainty that you don't have the rest of the sort of big features that they might not have seen in that first zone? Like, that first zone might be super polished, but how do you get assurances that the rest of it is tested well?
It takes a lot of effort. We've got some really awesome guys in QA that will play through a lot. For raids, we have the UX team. They're basically like a bunch of super good raiders that will test stuff. That's sort of how we try to balance some of the harder difficulties. We don't just, throw numbers at the wall and hope that it sticks. At the end of the day, though, I mean, honestly, WoW's a really big game. It's hard to test everything, and as anyone that's played WoW can attest to, you've probably ran into a bug or a couple. We do our best. People that post in the forums, I love you, every single one of you, especially when you give a detailed reports. Believe it or not, if WoW crashes or anything happens and you fill out that bug report, we do read it. So when you tell me to, fix the game, I read it. When you give me really specific, pre-production steps, I read it, and I want to send you like flowers or something. Yeah.
I'll give a shout out to our QA guys and gals across all the teams. I mean, they work their butts off just testing these things and spending just countless hours making sure that we've caught every single thing we could before we release it, and overnight we always run just a huge battery of tests, start at like midnight and they finish up maybe like 6 a.m., where we're running bots around and we're checking frame rate and we're looking at network, usage, and when we come in the next morning, we have this big dashboard and it kind of tells us how all the tests did and what areas, like suddenly the game drops to 30 frames a second in this one part of Tristram, like what the heck happened there? And then so you can go look through the change list for the artists and, oh yeah, this guy just made a huge high poly model of like a twig, like 40,000.
It looks really good, John.
Oh, it looks really good. Anyway, yeah, so there's a lot of people just exercising this stuff, just to make sure it's stable.
Thanks. So one final thing, like, in retail WoW, you have all these APIs that give you dynamic information about players and things like that, allow you to do really interesting things. In classic WoW, it's only static classes, skills, and items and things like that. Do you have any idea of bringing sort of those more rich APIs back to classic?
So this is a regular conversation that we have, both as the dev portal team and having it with our liaisons on the WoW team, the classic WoW team, to see what feels appropriate, because there's an element of we want to ensure that there's the classic experience. There's another element of we've also made all of these tech wins over the year that allow us to do so many amazing new things. The best answer is really it's just an ongoing discussion of finding what's the appropriate balance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time just for one more question, so I'm going to take it right over here.
Hi, I wanted to ask you recently had some servers for sale, and I think that's really cool. Now, I actually install data networks as my job, and so I'm curious about when you do take all those servers out and stuff like that. Do you do that in-house, or do you have like contractors that come out and do all the actual hardware of the networking? Or is it one where you just take the server rooms and you just refresh them as you go, or do you move them around, if you even know that aspect of the job?
So for the WoW, you're talking like about WoW server blades?
I'm actually talking about the actual servers that you utilize.
Like you want to buy Lightbringer, for instance.
Well, yeah, but no, I mean, like when you did that move and you switched everything over, what was was that an in-house thing that you do? Or
That's entirely in-house. We have actually the incredible IT team that basically helps make all of BlizzCon happen. All the electronics here, all the networking, that's the IT team. The IT implementation team is the one that flies out to data centers and meets a pallet of servers and installs the entire thing and gets it all cabled up, and they get it all networked. And they do the same thing when they have to tear one down or if they have to move it to a new data center. Those are Blizzard employees that they work their butts off. I've gone on a shift with them before, and at the end of the day, I'm laying on the ground and they're still going. Those guys are incredible.
And how would you get in on that?
Jobs.blizzard.com.
Yeah, there you go. And on that note, I think that we're going to end the panel here, but if you did not get your question answered and you would still like to talk to any one of us, several of us are going to be stepping over to the tables over here, which is on your right if you're here in the audience with us. Thank you guys all very much for joining us here at CodeCraft. Enjoyed getting to share some answers with all of you. Hopefully you got something out of it, and enjoy the rest of BlizzCon 2019.
Thanks, guys.